I am definitely going to get into all the aspects of sign language and deaf culture, and when I'm editing this, I'm going to be like, I left an important thing out, dang it, and I'm going to be so mad at myself, but it's fine. I'm just going to get into it, and it'll be what it'll be, and so yeah. When it comes to my journey with learning ASL, and I'm still in the middle of that journey, I don't know. It's definitely been a long and complicated one. The start of my journey would begin with a little girl named Allison. I would have been in first grade. My first grade teacher and my mom were actually pretty good friends. My first grade teacher had a little girl who was deaf, and her name was Allison. She was the cutest little thing on the entire planet. I didn't like her very much as a first grader because this little girl would come over to my house pretty much every single day because my mom would babysit her. And so, you know, when it comes to first graders, where we tend to be pretty jealous, we're like, hey, no, that's my mom. She's supposed to be giving me attention, not you. That was kind of the attitude I had towards her for the longest time. But she was also my introduction to my interest in learning ASL. My mom did not know any sign language, but she babysat her and did a lot of physical therapy with her, and did the best thing that my mom knew how to do at the time, which was give her video resources, a series called Signing Time, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I love learning the names for all the farm animals and the ABCs and stuff like that. I just fell in love with it to the point where I would watch it for fun, even when I was 11 or 12 years old. It was, to be kind of weird, just watch that kind of stuff for fun, but it was really entertaining, and I love the idea of learning sign language. There's a pretty big gap, I guess, when it comes to my learning, because I was introduced to it in first grade, and then throughout all of elementary school, junior high, and even up through high school, I didn't really learn anything new. I practiced finger spelling all the time. Honestly, it was probably the best thing ever, because when I got to the point where I did have access to taking an actual sign language class, it put me at least a little bit further ahead. Not by much, but a little bit. In my junior year of high school, I decided just to go all out with all the extracurriculars. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to go above and beyond and just, I don't know, prove myself in a sense. Junior year is a weird time, and I feel like that's also not the time to do it because that's also the busiest time in your life. But I got a job, I started taking honors AP CE classes, just everything, and I just piled it on top of that. I was costuming for our school play, and on top of all of this stuff that I had imposed on myself, I decided I wanted to take an extra class online to learn ASL. And you could do that through this one online high school, and it would count for credits and all that kind of stuff. So I decided that's where I was going to start out. It was an absolute train wreck because, like, when it comes to the basics, the foundation, you can't really learn things through videos or through mediocre assignments. You need to immerse yourself in that kind of an environment where you're only allowed to use sign language. But at the time, that was all I could do, and I only took 3 terms of it, because at that point I was costuming for the play, and that ended up taking priority. But my interest didn't really stop there, because at that point I also was applying to be part of our high school internship program, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. At one point I wanted to run my own business and run a daycare. I lost interest in that. So when I was applying for this internship program, I wanted to be in an elementary school classroom and see if I wanted to be a teacher and see if that would work. At that point, I knew about the deaf schools that were in Utah, which are amazing, by the way. I had gone there on a field trip with my online high school ASL class and absolutely fell in love with the environment and thought it was super cool. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, there's no way they're going to be able to get me an internship with this school. I don't even know any ASL to even have a grounds for that. When this teacher was interviewing me and asking me what I wanted to do, I had vaguely mentioned that I would like to go into deaf education or would like an experience with that, but it would be a long drive because at that point it would have been a 40-minute drive to and from the school. Combining that with my high school course load, it was just kind of bleh. It would have been a big mess. So I was like, I'm just okay with doing an elementary internship and I would be totally fine with that. And she was like, no, if you want to try out a deaf environment, you should go for it. I can get you an interview to go along with that. And I was like, okay, I'm okay, that that works for me. So with my minimal, like barely knowing any sign language at all skills, I was set up with an interview with the principal at the deaf school that I wanted to go to, and honestly I did a very crappy job. Like, he probably taught me more during that interview than like what I had previously known before coming into the interview. It was not a good interview, but because I had this teacher backing me up saying, hey, she's gonna be here. I can't remember if it was twice a week or 3 times a week, but I would be able to go and, you know, just kind of sit in and see what the environment was like. And they were like, sure, go ahead, bring her in. And so my senior year, that was my first semester of just being able to go in a few times a week, just be totally enveloped in it. Because at that point, I had been introduced to the idea of deaf culture, but didn't really understand the gravity of it and how amazing and deep and just awesome it was. So I was put in with a first grade class, and there was a total of 6 students in it, which is crazy when you think of that. Plus there was a teacher, a teacher's aide, a nurse, me as an intern. So there's 4 adults in the class for 6 students. And then my second semester there was another girl that came in as an intern, and so we had 5 teachers, basically 5 adults for the 6 student ratio. And that in and of itself kind of blew my mind. It was that internship that really laid the foundation for everything that I know about the language and the culture, and I could go into it and hopefully I'll be able to articulate it as well as it's running through my mind, because there's just so much to cover. It basically all started with me sitting at lunch with these kids and asking them what the different foods were called in sign language, and learning very basic signs like paper and time to clean up and just like all the basics when it comes to that. And they were absolutely adorable. I can't. They were just so cute. I love them very much. And learning name signs and everything that goes with that. My name sign is just that. And I was actually given my name sign during my internship by the teacher's aide, and her and I are still friends to this day. It's just, I have such happy memories thinking about that whole experience. That eventually ended and kind of solidified in my mind that at that time I really wanted to go into deaf education and be a teacher of the deaf. So then after that I graduated high school and went off to college. The college that I go to right now has a specific program for deaf elementary majors. And so I was like, this is it, I'm set. And on top of that, the first 4 years is just elementary education, and then the last year is deaf education. And if you meet all those requirements, you get a master's degree in 5 years. So that was awesome in and of itself. I got my first, besides the internship, which I learned everything, not everything, but a lot, to really have that foundation, I was able to take an ASL class at college by a deaf professor, and he is absolutely amazing. He's so just happy. He just wants to share with everyone all the things that he knows, all his knowledge, all of his wisdom when it comes to deaf culture and educating people on the political matters that go along with being deaf. And I don't know, most people don't really understand the gravity of it, but yeah, basically I'm currently taking classes from him. I'm at level 3 currently, and I've loved the experience so far, and I'm planning on continuing this path. But yeah, when it comes to just all the culture and and the politics and things that people don't really understand because it doesn't affect them on an everyday basis, us as hearing people, I don't know even where to start. I think when it comes to understanding deaf people at their core is that they are very prideful in the fact that they are deaf. They do not see it as a disability, and I don't think they should, because in reality it doesn't really inhibit them. They are capable of doing whatever they really want to. If you're ever interacting with a deaf person and you're trying to talk to them and they're like, oh, I'm deaf, don't say sorry. because they don't see it as a bad thing. It's a beautiful cultural thing because they have this tight-knit community of people that share their beliefs and values and morals and consider it a cultural thing. Like, Black people have their own culture, deaf people have theirs. In very simple terms, that's how you can put it. But yeah, and I think that's a struggle that a lot of them have because deaf people are often grouped into special education or disabilities. And when you treat people who have the capacity to do more and be very productive and successful, if you treat them like they're disabled, that's all they're ever gonna be. They're not gonna rise above whatever circumstances have presented them. They're not, like, if you coddle your child so much and you think they can't do anything, they're never gonna learn how to do anything. Think of it like that. And so they're very much advocates for themselves, and they're like, no, we can do this. A lot of people have this misconception that they can't even drive, when there's been statistics that deaf people are actually better drivers than hearing people. And it has to do with their brains are wired visually. So they are able to pick up and pay more attention than we as hearing people, where we have all these distractions. And instead of considering them disabled, consider them bilingual, because their first language is going to be sign language, being able to communicate in that sense, and then through sign language they learn English. So if we alter our curriculums and the way our schools are run for deaf people, if you alter them so that way they're considered bilingual, like a person who speaks Spanish comes into the school system, we know they're not dumb. They may not understand the curriculum because it's being taught in a language that they're not familiar with. They're very smart and capable. If you change the curriculum to meet their needs, they'll be just as successful as the next person. When it comes to educating deaf people, to start off with, most deaf people are born to hearing parents. It's usually not a genetically inherited thing. There are cases where it's like that, but most of the time it's not. So from birth, these kids are told that they're disabled, that there's something wrong with them. And we don't mean to come across that way as a society. We're just trying to help, but that's the thing that ends up happening. But these kids, as soon as they're identified as deaf, early intervention is thrown at them, which is a great idea in theory, because from a very young age they're given hearing aids and cochlear implants and all of these things that are supposed to help them be successful in life. But if you think about it that way, where we're trying to fix the problem, we're focusing on their weakness, their hearing, instead of focusing on their strength, which would be their vision, what they're able to receive and understand and accept. Early intervention is more focused on LSL, which is listening and spoken language. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you think about it, deafness is on a scale. Most people will think, oh, you're deaf, you can't hear anything at all, when that's not true. There's a scale. You may be profoundly deaf, or you may only have a little bit of hearing loss. And so for people who have a little bit of hearing loss, who meet the right criteria when it comes to how their ear works, and I'm not going to go into that because that's a bunch of medical stuff, it can be a very good thing for them to get a cochlear implant or a hearing aid, and they'll be able to function as a hearing person, and it's fine or whatever. But if they're profoundly deaf and a hearing aid or a cochlear implant isn't really going to help them, they tend to just push it and say it'll work, it'll work, it'll work. When in reality, if they did a different type of early intervention when it comes to deaf people, like a deaf early intervention, where a deaf person would come into the home and teach the child sign language and get them ready to go to a deaf institution where it's completely taught in sign language, that might be better. But instead we kind of push that aside because it's not preparing them to function properly in society, because then they'll be dependent on an interpreter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. As a society as a whole, as a world as a whole, we constantly are dependent on interpreters when it comes to dealing with different countries. So I don't see what the big deal is about that. But yeah, if children were put into deaf education and were given that, they might have more of a chance of succeeding, but instead they follow the route of listening and spoken language, which for some it will work, some it won't, but for a lot of kids, they'll get into the school system and they don't excel. They miss things in class. The teachers aren't aware of the needs of the child, and they tend to fall through the cracks and they get further and further behind. And so at that point, a lot of them are put into a deaf institution as a last resort. And at that point, they're very far behind, and they can catch up, but it'll take a lot more work and effort than if they were just put in there in the first place. So it's just a whole messy situation, and I wish we could change that, and I wish that more people were educated about this and were more in support of that, but at this point it's not, and it's a really hard situation. But yeah, when it comes to my journey with ASL, I'm not proficient, and I don't think I ever will be. With my college courses, I'm currently at level 3, taking my 3rd class out of 4 courses that make me, I guess, proficient in ASL, which I don't think coming out of that will be enough. I think I need to put myself into a deaf environment and use it every day, all day, every day, in order to become actually proficient in it. When it comes to life, because I don't depend on ASL to communicate, it's not very realistic unless I get a job in a deaf environment, and right now that's an option for me. I want to get all of my ASL courses out of the way and hopefully apply to one of the deaf schools just to work as a TA, get an idea of everything that goes along with that. But realistically, I don't think I will ever be a deaf educator, because I don't think it's right for me as a hearing person to go into a deaf classroom and teach these children like I'm not fluent in the language when it's not my first language, and I didn't grow up the way they did. I don't know all of the struggles that they've gone through. I have an idea, but I don't know what it's really like growing up to be deaf. And so because of that disconnect, I think that would cause problems between me and my students. Like, my heart may be in the right place, but when it comes to my skills, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Right now, I work as a head 2-year-old teacher at a daycare, and even that is challenging. And we speak the same language, just teaching them how to be basic, functioning little human beings, and they're absolutely adorable, but it's still very challenging. So I can't imagine how difficult it would be to go into an environment where I didn't grow up that way, I'm not fluent in the language, and try to teach these kids things that they need to know. I think there are other people that are more qualified for that, who are deaf or have grown up in a deaf environment and know those things a lot better than me. At this point, I think I will just be a elementary teacher. I'm gonna try my best to still stay involved in deaf culture and keep the friends that I have, still use sign language when I can, but I don't think it's going to be my career path. I still want to support deaf people while they advocate for themselves and just become more strong and get their message and knowledge out there, so that way people start treating them as they should be. So yeah, I may go into deaf education if I decide that my skill sets are going to be adequate for those children, but until they are, I don't think that's the path that I will be choosing. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. If you have questions about deaf culture or how to support deaf people, you can leave it in the comment section and I'll try to answer your questions and give you more resources and websites and deaf contacts to talk to, and ask them yourself how to be able to support them better. If you're wanting to learn ASL, I say go for it. It's a beautiful language and it's a beautiful culture, and as long as you're willing to put forth the effort to understand all of that in its entirety, I think it's an awesome thing to do. Okay, I think that's all I have to say. Bye.